I noticed my husband's secret spending on a completely ordinary evening, not during a fight, not after any sign of betrayal. Just another review of our joint account, the way I did every month. Every number made sense. Too much sense. So perfect it became suspicious. Money wasn't disappearing. No shady cash withdrawals, no late-night charges, no hotels, no unfamiliar restaurants. The money went to places that were clean, respectable, and made him look good. That's when I paused, not because I was scared, but because I realized if something was being hidden, it wasn't in the numbers. But to see what was wrong, I had to look back at the time when I still believed everything was working. People used to describe our marriage as steady. No noise, no drama, no one cheating. I'm Audrey, the type who doesn't react right away. I'm used to observing before I speak, used to staying calm even when something feels off. Simon, my husband, is the kind of man who puts everyone at ease. Polite, proper, says just enough. He's not the kind of person who makes you worry. That's why I had no reason to doubt him. In the beginning, I looked at the expenses with the calm of someone who saw no reason to interfere. I noted them, then moved on. But slowly, I started to see a pattern. Simon's money was always spent in ways that put him in the right place at the right time. Not flashy, not overboard. Just enough for people to notice. Just enough for his name to be attached to a good impression. I didn't ask. I didn't confront him. I didn't make it a big deal. Jealousy wasn't what I felt. I simply started tracking things with a cold sense of control. Like someone connecting facts, not a wife looking for faults. Every expense had a reason. And that was the problem. Simon was never flustered when I asked about money. He answered briefly, calmly, without getting defensive. He didn't hide, and he didn't over-explain. A man with nothing to hide would act exactly like that. At least, that's what I used to believe. But some things don't show up in words. I started noticing the way he carried himself around other people. Always appropriate, always kind, always on the right side of things. I also noticed how quiet he became when no one else was around. Not irritated, not cold, just absent. As if the performance was over, and he no longer had a reason to keep going. At home, Simon didn't do anything wrong. He never hurt me in any way you could name. He just wasn't really there. Our conversations skimmed the surface. Serious questions were answered with logic. Everything was correct. So correct there was no room for anything real. I didn't find a single dirty expense. Not one charge that made me blush or feel ashamed. If anything, the more I looked, the more the expenses felt suspiciously clean. As if they were designed so no one could question them. And that's when I realized I might have been asking the wrong question from the start. I stopped wondering where the money was going. I started wondering what the money was doing. It wasn't buying silence. It wasn't covering guilt. It was building an image, bit by bit, patient, precise. Simon wasn't using money to hide something bad. He was using money to highlight something good. The good people wanted to believe. The good he needed to be seen. That night, I closed my laptop and sat still for a long time. Not angry, not sad. Just a cold feeling running down my spine. The kind you get when you realize you're staring at a perfectly framed, beautiful painting, but can't find the artist behind it. If he wasn't hiding something bad, then what was he trying to prove? I no longer opened the statements to look for wrongdoing. After that quiet question that night, I started watching Simon the way you watch a familiar room after someone changes the lighting. Everything is still there. I just see it differently. His expenses kept appearing like clockwork, not rushed, not unusual. They lined up with moments that were conveniently right. Right when someone needed help. Right when a situation needed softening. Right when his presence could leave the best possible impression. Not flashy, not showy. Just enough for people to remember. Simon was always generous in a way that made no one feel indebted, but no one forget either. He didn't give money loudly. He showed up, put a hand on someone's shoulder, said just the right thing, did exactly one helpful act, then stepped back at the perfect moment. No one called it showing off. They called it character. I started to notice he always placed himself in the safest position in every story. When there was conflict, Simon never chose a side too early. He listened just long enough to know which one would be seen as right. When there was a problem, he helped in ways that wouldn't put him at risk. When praise came, he accepted it with just the right amount of modesty. Not more, not less. In front of others, Simon was warm. Not overly enthusiastic, but always pleasant. People trusted him. Not because he talked a lot, but because he never said the wrong thing. His words were clean without edges. No room for anyone to push back. I saw it more clearly when I stood next to him around other people. Simon shifted in small, precise ways. His voice slowed a bit, his eyes focused a bit more, his posture straightened just a touch. No one else noticed, but I did. It wasn't obvious fakery, it was a fine-tuned version of himself. And then I compared. In our marriage, Simon didn't do anything wrong, not in the usual sense of neglect. He was home, he was there at dinner. He was present for the big decisions. But his emotions weren't. Our conversations always ended neatly, as if they had reached the required length. Things that bothered me, he responded with logic, no pushback, no digging deeper, just closure. Simon avoided moments that required real presence. The moments without an audience, the moments that earned no points. He wasn't rude, he just wasn't there, as if he didn't know what to do when there wasn't a role to play. I realized he was always good at anything that came with an audience, but when no one was watching, he faded. Not bad. Not good, just empty. At that point, I didn't care where the money went anymore. I had my answer. The money wasn't hiding anything. It wasn't covering a mistake. It was keeping the rhythm of an image alive. Like stage lights turning on at the right moment. I started paying attention to the way Simon needed to be seen. He didn't want to be loved. He wanted to be recognized. Not intimacy, validation. From other people. From society. From any space where eyes existed. I realized I no longer played an important part in that system. I wasn't the audience. I didn't reflect his image back to him. I was too close to admire him. Too familiar to believe in the version he put on display. Some nights, Simon told me about a good deed he'd done. Not bragging, just reporting it. His voice calm like he was stating something obvious. I listened. I nodded, and I felt a clear distance. Not because the deed wasn't good, but because I couldn't feel anything behind it. He didn't ask what I thought. He didn't need to. He already had all the feedback he wanted from the outside. I was just the extra listener. I started to understand something cold. Simon didn't need me to live right. He needed the world to confirm he was right. I was part of the backstage, no light needed, no response required. In this story, money was no longer a secret. It was a prop, a tool used with precision, subtlety, and purpose. It helped Simon keep his moral painting sharp, no stains. No stray marks. When that thought settled fully in my mind, I didn't get angry. I wasn't disappointed in the usual sense. Everything just clicked, too smoothly, too logically. And for the first time, I accepted a very clear truth. Simon didn't need me. He needed an audience. There was one rainy afternoon that threw everything off its familiar orbit. Nothing dramatic, no witnesses, no outside eyes, just a situation that forced Simon to make a choice in a completely private space. And for the first time I saw him have no idea what to do with himself. It was a small thing. A family acquaintance got stuck in an awkward situation. Not urgent enough to demand immediate action, but not light enough to ignore. No one knew. No one would praise. There was no setting where Simon could show up at the perfect moment in the perfect role. There was just a decision that needed to be made. At home, between the two of us. Simon listened, nodded, went quiet. I waited for his usual reflex, a decisive action, a measured line, but nothing happened. He started circling the issue, asking for unnecessary details, suggesting delays, mentioning someone else's responsibility, as if he was searching for a way out of having to step forward. I watched him for a long time, not surprised, just confirming. When no one was watching, Simon didn't know how to do the right thing. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't good either. He hovered between possibilities, waiting for a signal from the outside to tell him which choice was safest for his image. And because there was no signal, he stalled. I didn't say anything in that moment. I let it pass. I let him shift the responsibility to someone else, to another time, to a more convenient circumstance. And I recorded it, coldly. For the first time in months, I decided to confront things directly. Not right then, but later that night, when the house was quiet and there was no role left for him to play. I didn't ask about money. I didn't mention the expenses. I didn't revisit a single number. I asked a different question. One Simon wasn't used to answering. I asked him why he didn't choose. A short question. Not accusatory, not condemning, no emotion attached. I didn't ask, why didn't you help? I asked, why did you avoid that choice? Simon looked at me. For the first time, I saw real confusion in his eyes. Not because the question was hard, but because it left him nowhere to hide. No safe answer, no audience to face. He started giving me reasons. Not enough information. Needed more time. Shouldn't interfere too much. All the familiar explanations, all logical. but they slid right past me because logic wasn't what I was asking for. I cut him off. Not loud, not harsh, just one line, very short. You didn't choose because no one would see it, right? The room went silent. Simon froze. Not in a dramatic way, just the sudden stillness of someone who'd been stripped of his usual tools. He didn't argue, didn't deny it, didn't agree. He did nothing. And that said everything. I didn't need him to answer. The question wasn't meant to be answered. It only needed to be spoken, at the right time, in front of the right person. In that moment, I understood clearly. Simon didn't live by values. He didn't act because he believed something was right. He acted when something would be seen as right. The difference is tiny. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. He wasn't moral in any deep sense. He performed morality, like a skill, like a role he'd studied carefully. He knew exactly what to do when the lights were on. But when the lights went out, he had no idea who he was in the dark. I didn't expose him. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't turn it into a humiliating moment. I just said the truth. Short, calm, and left it there. That was my revenge arc. Not loud, not a clear victory. Just asking the right question at the right time, and letting the emptiness reveal itself. After that night, Simon changed in small ways. No one else noticed, but I did. He became more careful with his words, more precise in his behavior. Like he'd realized there was a tiny crack in his image, and he was trying to cover it. The good man image didn't collapse, it just started to fracture. A thin line, visible only if you stood very close. And I was close enough to know it wouldn't heal. I didn't change in any way people could point out. I didn't become colder, I didn't become distant. I just stopped doing one small thing I had done, almost without thinking. I stopped reacting. I didn't ask more questions. I didn't bring up that moment again. I didn't search his eyes or his tone for clues. I didn't try to seem better or worse. I kept my life exactly the same, but I pulled back the presence he'd gotten used to. I stopped asking questions, the ones that used to help Simon anchor himself as the reasonable one, the righteous one, the measured one. No more, what do you think? No more, how do you see it? I left him alone with his choices, without me serving as his moral reference point. And more importantly, I stopped being the witness. Before, even without saying it, I was the one who saw him. Saw and acknowledged him. One steady gaze, enough to confirm he was being the best version of himself. I didn't cheer, but I was present. And that presence turned out to be more valuable than I ever realized. Simon started losing control in a very quiet way. He became more attuned to my reactions, not out of concern, but out of missing feedback. When he talked about something good he'd done, I listened, but didn't nod. When he said something proper, I didn't add to it. When he waited for a confirming look, I still looked at him. But I didn't mirror what he hoped for. No criticism, no heavy silence, just the absence of a role he relied on. At home, there was no longer a built-in audience. Simon started carrying that unease with him when he went out. I noticed it in social spaces where he used to be steady. He talked a little more than usual, explained himself a little too carefully, as if he needed to make sure his image stayed intact. And then there was one small moment that revealed everything. A casual gathering with a few acquaintances. Not an event. No stage. Just a space where Simon was used to being seen as the one who said the right things. He made a very proper comment, the kind people usually nod along to. Out of old habit, he turned toward me, waiting. Not for approval exactly, just for that quick, familiar moment. That tiny confirmation I used to give without thinking. I stayed quiet, not to make a point. I just didn't feel the need to mirror anything anymore. I looked at him, calm, then shifted my eyes to someone else. The conversation moved on. No one noticed. No one felt awkward, except Simon. I saw the misstep in him clearly, quick, subtle, but enough to tell me I'd touched the right spot. Without the familiar confirmation, he looked lost. Like an actor who suddenly forgot an important line but still had to stay on stage. My silence didn't make him look bad in front of anyone. It only revealed something private. He depended on being seen far more than he realized. And when that gaze disappeared, he no longer knew where he stood. I didn't attack him. I didn't expose him. I didn't need anyone else to understand this. My revenge arc wasn't about revealing Simon. It was about taking back a power I'd given without knowing it. That power was silent validation. The presence of someone close enough to see him even when the lights were off and still stay. When I withdrew that, Simon lost the most important support beam of the moral image he'd built. He didn't fall apart. Not yet. But he started to wobble. At home, he started trying harder, caring more in a clumsy way, asking questions he'd never asked before, not out of understanding, but out of sensing something had slipped away. But by then, I was standing somewhere else entirely. I wasn't looking for change from him anymore. I just observed. And in that observation, I saw clearly the emptiness I'd only sensed before. No malice, no great wrongdoing, just a hollow space where a self-driven set of values should have been. I realized I couldn't stay to fill that space, and I had no responsibility to try. The decision to leave didn't come from a fight. There was no breaking point. It arrived quietly, like a logical conclusion once all the evidence is in. I didn't need a dramatic moment to walk away from a place that no longer held anything for me. When that thought became clear in me, I felt light, not hurt, not angry, just a cold certainty. I knew I was about to step out of the last role Simon needed me to play. And when that happened, without any dramatic gesture, the power would shift completely. I told Simon I was leaving on a completely ordinary morning. No climax, no argument. I didn't wait for the right moment to say it because I didn't need that anymore. I just said it, the way you state a truth that's already settled in your mind. He didn't react right away. No anger, no pleading, just silence, as if he was waiting for me to add something. But I didn't. I didn't explain. I didn't list reasons. I didn't replay the moments that led me to this decision. None of that mattered anymore. I didn't take money. I didn't leave behind a list of what I deserved. I didn't ask for an apology, because I didn't need one to walk away. I wasn't betrayed in a way that made me demand justice. I just saw a truth too clearly, and that truth had already done its job. Simon asked if there was anything he could fix. The question came late, but not because of timing. It came late because it was the first time he asked without anyone else listening. No role to play. No outside gaze, just him, standing in front of someone who no longer reflected the image he needed. I answered with one sentence. Short, cold, no extra emotion. I told him that being good and looking good aren't the same thing. And I didn't want to live with someone who only cared about the second. Simon didn't say anything after that. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't try to prove me wrong. Maybe he understood, or maybe he just didn't know what language to use when there was no audience. Whatever the reason, the moment closed neatly. He didn't fall apart right away. I knew that. Simon would still hold his image together for a while. People would still trust him, still call him kind. Roles practiced for years don't disappear after one breakup. But he'd lost the one thing he never realized he depended on. He lost the person who saw him when the lights were off. Not a fan, not a validator, but someone close enough to tell the difference between action and motive, between doing the right thing because it's right and doing it because it looks right. When I left, no one was left to hold that line for him. I didn't keep up with Simon after I walked away from that marriage. I didn't need to know whether his image cracked or stayed intact. That had nothing to do with me anymore. The calm I felt didn't come from what he lost, but from no longer staying to fill a void I didn't create. There were nights I sat alone in my new space and realized I didn't have to watch anyone anymore. I didn't have to decode proper behavior. I didn't have to wonder where a good action came from. The quiet wasn't empty. It was clear. I didn't win this story in the usual sense. I didn't expose him. I didn't unmask him. I didn't get the crowd's sympathy. But I didn't lose either. Because I stepped out of a performance I never signed up to script. Power, in the end, doesn't come from being seen as right. It comes from not needing anyone's belief to know you're living honestly. When I walked away from that marriage, I didn't take bitterness with me. I took understanding, and that was enough for me not to look back. Money never hid guilt. It only hid emptiness, very effectively, very politely, until no one believed in the image anymore. And once that belief disappeared, every number became meaningless. Sometimes the biggest lessons don't come from a clear betrayal, but from the moment you realize this. Some people don't live by values. They live by the image of value. Money doesn't hide wrongdoing. It hides emptiness, until no one believes in what's being performed. That's where the story ends. Thank you for staying and listening all the way through. If you've ever been in a relationship that looked right from the outside, but felt fundamentally hollow on the inside, what do you think is the first sign you should trust? Share your thoughts in the comments. I appreciate every story and every perspective you bring.